What if I told you that immigration is both the lifeblood of Canada's economy and one of the invisible reasons why your rent keeps climbing? Stay with me, because today we dive into the complicated truth behind immigration, economic growth, and housing prices in Canada. This is not about taking sides, it's about seeing the trade-offs. By the end of this video, you'll understand how immigration helps Canada prosper, but also why it creates real pressure on prices, and what we can do about it. Let's unpack it. Why Canada is importing people. Canada has one of the fastest growing populations among G7 nations. In 2023, the country added about 1.27 million people, increasing its population by approximately 3.2%, the fastest in over 6 decades. Much of that growth came from international migration, both permanent and temporary. The immigrant population consists largely of young and working-age people. That helps offset Canada's aging demographic, alleviating pressures on labor shortages, pension systems, and healthcare staffing. Economic benefits. Immigrants contribute more than just bodies. They bring consumption, labor, skills. More people mean more demand for goods and services. When people buy groceries, go to school, use healthcare, rent housing, pay for transportation, etc., that spurs business, investment, and often GDP growth. Also, many immigrants fill gaps in sectors where domestic labor is scarce: healthcare, construction, technology. This helps keep certain industries from stalling. There's evidence that newcomers produce more bang for the buck in the economy. Reports by banks, e.g. CIBC, indicate that newcomers help lift economic output relatively more than their cost. So far, immigration looks like a win. But there are trade-offs, and that's what many people feel, especially when it comes to housing and cost of living. The price side of the story. Housing prices and rents. Data. A joint study by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada and Statistics Canada, 2006 to 2021, found that increases in the influx of recent immigrants, those arriving within 5 years, account for about 11% of the rise in median house values and 11% of the rise in median monthly rents across municipalities with more than 1,000 people. In large municipalities, population over 100,000, where around 80% of new immigrants settle, that share is even larger. In those big cities, immigration accounted for about 21% of the increase in house values and approximately 13% of the rent increases. Canada.ca. So yes, the demand created by immigrants is measurable in how it pushes up both buying costs and rental prices. Other pressures that amplify the effect. Housing supply constraints. In many cities, building new housing is slowed by zoning regulations, limits on multifamily housing, delays in development approvals, high land costs, environmental reviews, sometimes opposition from residents, often known as "not in my backyard" or NIMBYism. Geographic constraints. Cities like Vancouver or Toronto have natural limits, water, mountains, etc., which make expansion expensive or difficult. That intensifies competition for land and pushes up prices. High demand from non-permanent residents, international students, temporary workers, etc., add to the housing demand, often preferring rentals or shared housing, which further tightens the rental market. These people sometimes don't show up in permanent resident statistics, but they are part of the demand for housing and goods. Interest rates, inflation, and cost of construction also matter. When mortgage rates are low, more people want to buy, which supports higher home values. Construction materials and labor costs rising make new units more expensive, which keeps supply from keeping up. These are compounding pressures. Even if data is more diffuse, economists point to cost pressures in materials and labor as part of the overall housing issue. Cost of living more broadly. Beyond housing, more people in a region mean more demand for transportation, utilities, schooling, health services. If infrastructure doesn't keep up, costs rise or quality degrades. Also, in some cases, newcomers pay a higher share of their income in rent/transport, etc., which contributes to feelings that everything is getting more expensive. How immigration and price rise. Dynamics interact. 1. Out-of-phase supply versus demand. When immigration increases rapidly, demand jumps. If housing supply, new construction, new rentals, etc., lags, that mismatch pushes up prices. Sometimes supply does catch up, but often with delay because of regulatory, financial, labor constraints. By then, prices have already risen, which raises expectations, land values, etc., making future building more expensive, a feedback loop. 2. Regional variation impacts are stronger in large metropolitan areas, where immigrants tend to concentrate. Smaller towns may feel less of the pressure. Interestingly, in some periods, immigration rose a lot, but housing prices did not rise as much in certain provinces, showing that it's not immigration alone, but the mix of immigration plus local housing policy plus supply elasticity. 3. Policy levers and trade-offs. Restricting immigration slows demand, which may ease pressure on housing markets, but at cost of slower labor force growth, potential worker shortages, less consumer demand, etc. Alternatively, boosting housing supply, faster approvals, more multi-unit housing, relaxing zoning, investing in infrastructure, can help reduce the upward pressure on prices without sacrificing the benefits of immigration. Sometimes policies target where immigrants settle, aiming for smaller or mid-sized cities to spread out demand. But that requires those areas to have enough jobs, services, infrastructure. In recent months, there is discussion in Canada about tightening immigration, especially non-permanent residents and international student intake, in part to relieve housing pressure. Some forecasts suggest that slower population growth, through reduced immigration, could allow wage growth to accelerate because labor supply grows more slowly, and reduce urgency in building housing at huge scale, but also could hurt sectors depending heavily on newcomers. There is also pushback. Many argue that the real issue isn't immigrants, but policy failures. Insufficient housing supply, zoning laws too restrictive, delays, speculative real estate investment, rising cost of construction materials, etc. These are structural issues that can be addressed without reducing immigration. Pitfalls. If immigration is too rapid without infrastructure or housing supply keeping pace, affordability will worsen, and social tensions may increase. Some immigrants end up in poorer housing or high-cost rental burdens, which can cause hardship, especially if wages are slow or newcomers face barriers in job markets. Rising cost of living might lead some people, including immigrants, to leave Canada, reverse immigration, if they feel they can't afford to stay. There is some evidence this is happening. Solutions and policy ideas: increase housing supply more quickly, streamline permitting, reduce red tape, support multi-unit housing, encourage affordable housing development, land use reform and zoning changes to allow higher density housing, especially in desirable areas. Regional dispersal: incentivize immigrants to settle in smaller or mid-sized cities with comparable services and job opportunities to reduce pressure on big urban areas. Infrastructure investment: ensure that public transit, schools, hospitals, roads, etc. keep up with population growth. Affordable housing programs, targeted rent supports, housing subsidies, or non-market housing to help lower-income households. Wages and labor policy: ensure newcomers have access to fair wages, credential recognition, job training, etc., so that the benefit of immigration is broadly shared. Things for citizens and stakeholders to watch. Housing starts: are new homes, apartments being built at numbers that match population growth? Government policy on immigration quotas, non-permanent residents, international students? Local versus federal government coordination: whether cities are getting enough resources and permission to build. Changes in rent regulation, zoning laws. So where does this leave us? Immigration is clearly playing a huge role in Canada's economic engine, bringing in people who spend, work, and help keep the country growing and competitive. But it is also fueling demand that's pushing up housing prices and rents, especially in big cities where supply has failed to keep up. The challenge isn't to stop immigration, it's to manage it wisely, to ensure supply, infrastructure, and regional planning can match the growth, to make sure newcomers and longtime residents alike can afford to live without being crushed by cost. Here's a question for you. What trade-offs are you willing to accept? Would you prefer fewer immigrants and more affordable housing, or continued high immigration with strong support for housing construction? I'd love to know your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Which side of the balance feels more urgent to you? Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, make sure you subscribe to Money Route so you don't miss future deep dives like this one. We dig into the economics, the data, and the real-life impacts. See you in the next video, where we untangle more of the unseen forces shaping your money and your life.